This is episode 69 of Zen and the Art of Real Estate Investing with my guest, Brian Burke. Brian is the president and CEO of Praxis Capital, a vertically integrated real estate private equity investment firm. You probably know Brian from his book, The Hands-Off Investor, an insider's guide to investing in passive real estate syndications. He's acquired over $800 million worth of real estate over his 30-year career. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me here, Jonathan. This is going to be fun, I think.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited. I like to start here because it's a question a lot of people don't get a lot. But when you were growing up, were you interested in real estate?
Not at all. I had no idea anything about real estate.
That's why I asked, because I think people are surprised that 50% or more really had no interest, growing up. It just wasn't a thing. What was the first time that you remember being like a little bit interested in real estate?
It was probably, I was around 18 or 19 years old. And I had, my parents got a foreclosure notice taped to the door. And then somebody came to the house wanting to buy the house. And I didn't really understand any of that, what was going on. And I thought, well, that's it seemed kind of interesting about a year later when I was reflecting back on it and thought, like, I wonder why that guy was here. And, what was motivating him to do that? And what's this whole foreclosure thing anyway? I've seen the notices in the newspaper about, notice of trustees sale. And it just got me to thinking, and I thought I had to explore and figure out what all was going on. And, I never looked back.
And so once you thought foreclosure, what was the first thing? Because I think there's a lot of people out there who are interested in foreclosures, but they've generally dried up since the pandemic. So what did you do? And this is a while ago when you're interested in it. So what did you do to get the ball rolling with foreclosures?
Yeah, this is the late 1980s.
Yes, I was doing it with my dad at the same time. So I remember the days. For me, it was we would go to the clerk's office. My dad was an attorney, so he knew everyone at the clerk's office, and they would just give us the big list. Like, it would just be printed, and we would go through, drive by all the foreclosures, go push me through the window of the ones, because it was just a different time. People don't understand this. How did you get started with it?
Yeah, kind of the same way. I started cutting the notices out of the newspaper, the public notices. I would cut those out and then, I'd tape them to a piece of paper, and then I would have like all these notes flying around of what was going to auction. That's kind of what led to me getting more sophisticated in this business. Is I would attend the foreclosure auction, despite the fact that I didn't have a dollar to my name. Here I am at this foreclosure auction where you have to pay full cash at the time you make a bid.
Yeah.
But I'm showing up, because I got to learn. I got to see who's doing this and how they're doing it and learn about it. And what I was noticing is, like, everybody was like shuffling papers around. They got file folders everywhere and everybody's disorganized. And I'm like, there's got to be a better way. So I wrote my own software. I decided I'm going to spend time figuring out how to write my own software to like keep track of all this stuff. So I literally like made this whole software platform that I could take a laptop into the county recorder's office. And I literally would sit there for hours and hours and hours, several days a week, researching title to all the foreclosure sales that were coming up. And I could input all the information from each lien or loan or deed or whatever that was on record and input it into the software that I created. It would automatically prioritize all the liens and come up with like a title report and everything. And so I could show up to the auction and I would have this printed out list of everything that was going to auction that day. And like everybody was like blown away. They were like, well, they're shuffling through all these notes and I'm totally organized. And I had all the information and I did that for, it was probably 4 or 5 years before I actually made my first auction purchase. So it was a long learning and development process.
So how did you start to scale this up into a full scale business, which eventually turned into Praxis Capital?
Well, it was just an organic process of growth, really. Foreclosure volume grew massively. And so we were buying, fixing and flipping, at one point, like 4 or 5 houses a year. Then it grew to a couple dozen houses a year. And then about 04, 05, 06, it was like no houses a year because I was just afraid the market was going to tank. It was just ridiculous. And then the market did tank. And then we were doing 100 houses a year at the flip of a light switch.
Yeah.
And when we were doing that, we had to raise money to do that kind of volume. So we were reaching out to folks and bringing on investors to invest in these deals. And we were at some point, I just looked at it and thought, you know what, all these foreclosures are going to be gone sooner or later. We're going to get through all this backlog and all this stuff. And now we've got all these great investors with all this capital. And, what are we going to do with it? If the foreclosures are gone, how are we going to invest for these people? And that's when I decided multifamily was going to be our path. And I got into multifamily in 2002 on a personal investment when I did 1031 exchange of a couple of rental houses. I got out a couple of rental houses into an apartment building and thought that was going to be the way to build kind of like some retirement wealth. But now when I was faced with the situation, I thought, you know what, I could actually build a business out of this, not just a retirement, but I could actually build a business out of this by taking these investors who are investing in all these foreclosures, and we can start investing in multifamily. So that's exactly what I did. And we started buying down in Texas. And then since then, just, expanded into several states and several thousand units.
And that seems like a good step up too, because foreclosures I don't consider them risky just because the prices are so good, but there's a lot more that goes into it. You got to fix them up, get them back on the market. The neighborhoods are developing. Stepping up with those same investors from foreclosures to multifamily, where there's like, wow, generated income could be coming in if you're buying one that's already fixed up. That must have been kind of like an easy transfer of the capital from one to the other.
You would think, but surprisingly, it was a little bit more difficult than one would
Really?
expect. Yeah,
Yeah.
it really was interesting because there's mindset differences between investors, right? And so
Yeah.
when you build a business of flipping houses where you're in and out very quickly, people have an arbitrage mindset where it's like, okay, I'm making this investment, in 3 months, we're out, we're getting our profit. We have very little exposure to the market.
Mm.
And, at the time, remember this, when we really started this massive expansion, it was, the great financial collapse was still, people's memories. And people didn't really want to be exposed to the potential of having another collapse. So they were afraid. They liked flipping because they felt it was lower risk. Now you're asking them to make a long-term commitment, make a 5-year bet on the market. And it was a stretch for a lot of people. And some people never got there. Some new people that never would have invested in the foreclosure deals came on board because they're like, yeah, hey, that stuff doesn't interest me, but this is really interesting because there's income. And so it was an interesting evolution, and it doesn't always go quite the way you think. But it eventually grew quite large.
Can you explain a debt fund too? People have talked about it a lot, but I don't think your general investor really understands what a debt fund is.
Well, and most of the times when people are investing passively in a real estate syndication, it's generally what's called an equity fund. And an equity fund means that you're buying a piece of this real estate. So let's say we're going to go buy a 100-unit apartment complex for $10 million. I'm just making up numbers.
Yep.
And I say, I'm going to need $3 million of equity to make this happen. I'm going to go borrow $7 million and I need $3 million. And that's going to give us the $10 million we need. The investors are the $3 million portion. It's equity. A debt fund is different. In a debt fund, we're actually buying debt. So instead of going and buying an apartment complex, I might buy the loan that is lent against an apartment complex. And so the difference to me, that for the investor, there's a couple of main differences. In a typical equity fund, you get distributions when and if the property is producing cash flow. And generally that takes a period of time for that cash flow to materialize. 1 to 2 years before distributions start is not uncommon. In a debt fund, as soon as those interest payments start, which is usually the first of the month following when the loan is made, there's cash flow coming in. So there's an immediate instant return. It's something that in the past never really interested me much because the returns aren't stellar. The returns are kind of like 8, 9, 10, maybe 11%. Whereas we were doing 15 to 50% returns in equity funds in our real estate investments. So it isn't as sexy, but at a time like this, a debt fund feels really, really good because somebody else's money, somebody else's equity is in first loss position. So if, the things go to hell in a handbasket. Somebody else is losing money before we or our investors are losing money. So it's just a comfortable place to be. It's a steady, kind of more cash flow, lower risk, lower return type of fund. But I think it's appropriate for where we are in the market today, which is a lot of uncertainty and a little bit more risk.